I'm living proof that you can go from heartbreak to healing to total transformation. My divorce in 2020 led me to meditation and to the understanding that your greatest transformation begins with one thing: understanding yourself. Not just your human self, your divine self too. Because when you live only from the human lens, life feels like an obstacle course. But when you align with the divine in you, life becomes a colorful path, guided, adventurous, and deeply aligned. I'm Charu, and this podcast is your invitation to begin that journey. So let's begin. Hello, and welcome to your Colorful Path with Charu. Today, I'm joined by Joh Jarvis, a New York-based Vedic meditation teacher and founder of The Light Inside. Since 2020, she's been bringing meditation to correctional facilities like Rikers Island and other prisons across the United States, teaching over 100 incarcerated individuals and staff. Before that, she spent over 2 decades as a media executive and journalist in Australia. Joh, I'm so happy to welcome you to your Colorful Path. Thank you for saying yes.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. I have so many questions, but before we dive deeply in, I want to sort of get our audience into the Vedic method. And there are so many types, but you're trained in Vedic meditation, and it's very different from just an app meditation or a mindfulness situation. How would you explain the difference to someone new in a brief way?
Yes, it is. You're right. Very different. The first thing is it's always taught in person, in the same room. So it's never taught over Zoom. It's never taught online. The reason for that is because the person learning meditation receives a mantra. And the mantra in this case in Vedic meditation is a sound. It's actually a vibration. It's not a word that means something. And these vibrations or mantras are always passed on molecule to molecule, So that's the first key difference. Well, there's 2 differences. 1, it's in person in the same room. 2, you receive a mantra, which is a sound. And these mantras are, the way that we select them is taught to the teachers of Vedic meditation as part of their training. And so they're not something you can just pull off the internet and find. They're selected for a reason and given to people for a reason. So you have one that is personal to you, although there are classes of mantras and some people will be sharing the same mantra. I think the other key difference in this type of meditation is that when you're shown how to think the mantra, but you're not focusing on it. Lots of other types of meditation usually have a point of focus. It's a way of, I think the purpose of that is to still the mind. With this, we're not trying to still the mind. What we're doing is we teach people how to think it, but we actually are also teaching them how to let it go. So I say to people, if you've got a busy ADHD type mind, it's perfect meditation for you because you could just let your mind wander. So you think the mantra, let it go, mind wanders. When you remember, bring it back in, which is not code for bring the mantra back in and focus on it and hang on to it. It's in fact the exact opposite. So there's some of the differences. Actually, I'll put one other one in there. When you learn with us, you learn over 4 consecutive days and 90 minutes each time. By the end of that, you're self-sufficient, meaning you don't need a teacher to guide you. You're essentially able to meditate anywhere that you've got back support, in a taxi cab, in a train, of course at home, sitting up on the couch. Yeah, so those are some of the differences with this type of meditation.
And the easiest part I have always found about the Vedic method is it's just 20 minutes and it's deeply relaxing, very, very profound. 20 minutes in the morning, at night. You're not dependent on headphones or music or anything. You're completely independent. You can do it anywhere, in the park, in the bedroom, wherever you have like good support, and that's it. And so the barriers to meditation are very few.
Yes. It's absolutely right. It's a really simple, easy technique. And I I think what I valued myself, obviously I teach it, I value it so much, I learned to teach it. But previous to that, what I really valued was the self-sufficiency aspect of it, that I didn't need anything else in order to meditate. Like you say, all of those things, you don't need any recordings or anything. You just sit down, close your eyes, think the word, the mantra, the vibration, you think it in the way that it's a little bit like how I described, and do that for 20 minutes and you're done. And you feel, do you do that twice a day? And it's very energizing. I never used to think of meditation as being energizing before I learned. I thought of it as being calming. I was looking to reduce my anxiety. I have severe anxiety and depression, actually. So I was looking to reduce anxiety. But I got so much more from it than just reduced anxiety, which is actually a lot. I slept better. But the key thing that I was just alluding to then was it's easy, effortless. You think it, you relax deeply, and then you're energized. Energized. Who would have thought meditation actually energizes you? But if you're, what's happening is that you're releasing so much stress that's embedded in the body, in the nervous system. This technique, because you rest deeply, allows your body to release stress. People think stress is just a thought. It's not just a thought. It's actually, it's embedded in your physiology and your nervous system. You need a technique to release it. Sleep is one way to release and detox stress. Meditation, it does it on a greatly enhanced, expedited, in an expedited way. It speeds up the release of that stress. You're energized. That's what comes out of that.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like when you started, you said you were dealing with a lot of anxiety, and that's kind of what was the catalyst to bring you to meditation. But then what led to you actually taking it up to really teach it? Was there a moment that you knew like this was the path? Because your path started as a media executive, right? That's so interesting.
Yeah, so I was running a media network called ABC News Radio. So it was a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news network. And I was stressed, partly stressed because of the work, but I was stressed because, I'd never really learned to manage my stress. I'd had some deep trauma in my life. My brother died, at one stage. He died very young, and I hadn't learnt to deal with that grief. And so my way of dealing with it was to drink a lot of alcohol, which was very effective, actually, because it dampens the grief. But then it all has to be worked out in the end. And of course, eventually there's a cost from drinking a lot. And so I had to stop drinking because my partner at the time said, if you don't stop, I'm out. And so I did stop. I got some help and I stopped. But then all the feelings, anxiety was part of that. It just became very obvious to me. And so somebody suggested I learn to meditate. That's how I got into meditation. But then the contrast between being so stressed, so sad, so just generally defeated by life, the contrast between that and how I started to feel was enormous. And it was so great that eventually so I was out at lunch, actually. Let's say it was about 2 years, I think, after I'd learned to meditate. I was out at lunch with a friend, and he said to me, he was also a meditator. He has similar sort of career to mine. So we're kind of, I would have thought, unlikely people to be meditation teachers, though who is a likely person, I don't know. But certainly I never thought of myself as someone who'd be a meditation teacher. Kind of as an idea, it didn't attract me. It's not something I was thinking, oh gosh, wouldn't that be great? I just never, ever thought that would be a great idea. And then my friend said he was going to learn to be a teacher. And it was just like a bolt out of the blue. I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And one of the things that happens when you've been meditating for some time, or even a short time, you start to really connect with your intuition, and you start to recognize that when you have a strong feeling like that or a desire, that it's something to take seriously. That's what my teacher had taught me, that these desires coming through you are not just for you. They're coming from the field of intelligence. And they're coming from the field of intelligence because the field of intelligence wants you to evolve, to grow as a human, to become more sophisticated, if you like, not meaning that you wear better clothes, that you just become more able to handle complex situations, just to operate in the world at a higher level and to manage so many more things and contribute in a way that you mightn't otherwise have been doing. So when you experience a desire like that, it's the cosmos explaining to you, or at least giving you the desire to expand, but it's not just for you, it's for everyone. And that part people often forget, that it's not just for you, that it's for everyone. I, in a way, think of it as a responsibility to respond to that feeling. Back then I didn't, but I do now. I think, it's a big thing not to respond to that. You need to pay attention. What meditation does is it just makes you so much more aware of those desires that are coming through you. Anyway, I took it seriously, and very quickly I was enrolled in a teacher training course with my teacher, and I became a teacher of Vedic meditation, and I kept doing my media job, but I didn't forever. I eventually left that and moved to New York from Sydney. And about the age of 49, I moved to New York and became a teacher here, and a whole new life began.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I fully agree that when you meditate, and I have personally experienced this as well, there is a layer of you that I think is completely run by your mind, and it's full of if-then statements and fear and scarcity and all of the good stuff that prevents you from going after those things that truly speak to you. And when you meditate, I feel like parts of those layers start falling off, kind of like a curtain dropping, and it just becomes easier to follow the things that really speak to your heart. It could be teaching meditation, like in your case, or, going like me, like launching even this podcast. I would not have been able to do this if I was just listening to the mind, because it would say, well, there is 1 billion podcasts. What are you going to do? Right. And so that pursuit is perfect pursuit of, in fact, it's not even a pursuit of intuition. I think it's a very natural, beautiful after effect of taking up a practice like meditation. So thank you for sharing that, because I think there are a lot of people who have all these different dreams that speak to them, but it's really hard sometimes to let go of that logical, rational mind and go towards what the heart desires. And what you're saying is, when you meditate, it becomes easier to listen to those callings. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if people were living like that more, then we'd have a much happier world, because you're listening to the desires that are deep within you. And I believe you need help to do that. And at the very, very least, you need to be doing something to calm your nervous system in order to experience those desires clearly.
Yeah. And it's interesting then. So you could have taught meditation, and I'm sure you have taught meditation to several types of people, right? Mm-hmm. But why prisons? What drew you to that idea? What was that path like?
Well, I do teach meditation I teach it to, actors, fashion design. I live in New York City, so you can get people like fashion designers, a lot of fashion designers, funnily, a range of people. I think the last person I taught was a corporate lawyer. But I love teaching those people. But there was a point at which I decided to teach incarcerated people. And how did that come about? Through the process I'm describing. So I'd been living in New York City for a few years, and I was loving it. I was having a great life in many ways. I'd got married. I didn't plan to do that. Didn't even think I wanted to do that, but I did, to somebody, I'm still in a relationship with, and it's a fantastic relationship. So wonderful. I love living in New York City. So a whole lot of great things were happening. But what wasn't great was that I wasn't teaching many people to meditate. When you set up a business like teaching meditation, you need a network of people, unless you've got a huge social media presence. And I certainly didn't. So it was hard moving from one country to a new country and establishing yourself as a meditation teacher. And so I'd been here for maybe 3-4 years, and I went to my teacher and said to him, it's great. It was great to move here, but, I followed my desire to live here, which, he teaches us to do. But I'm not teaching many people to meditate. Have you got any ideas? And he said, if there was one cohort of people you wanted to teach, who would it be? And I said, incarcerated people. Without missing a beat, I said, incarcerated people. And he said, do that. And I said, well, that's not really a business plan, It's not going to improve my work circumstances because, I was pretty sure that it was going to be difficult to be paid to be teach incarcerated people. And he said, Joh, you know this, you need to follow that desire and see what unfolds. And it's incredible when you do follow the desire that's deep within you that came to me so easily, what happens when you do that. And things just unfolded. So it's not easy to get into the prison system for a start. But the doors open pretty naturally, actually. And I started working in Rikers Island Jail, which is a notorious correction facility. It's notorious for its very violent, one of the most violent penal colonies in Australia, in the United States. It's one of the biggest penal colonies in the United States. I mean, I think it holds around 6,500 people now. It's not the biggest, but it's big. It's extremely violent. And interestingly, they put me in maximum security to start off with, when I hadn't even been inside a jail or a prison before. So I know that I've sort of gone down this path of telling you about what I'm doing, but I'm not answering the question, why did you do it? I didn't have a detailed, I wasn't sitting around thinking, gee, if I do something in my life, I want it to be teaching incarcerated people. I really hadn't thought about it. There were things that made me, I suppose at one point as a teacher of Vedic meditation, it had occurred to me while I was learning, my teacher spoke about the fact that he had taught in prisons before. So I was kind of aware of Vedic meditation doing it. I was aware that I had changed enormously through meditation. And when I say I'd changed, I was probably less irritable person. I just felt myself happier and happier and happier. And when you're happier, you're nicer to people. And it just occurred to me that would have and also I'd had an addiction, and so all of these things made me think, wow, imagine if incarcerated people had access to this. I wonder if they would be interested in learning it. I wonder if it would have any impact. But I hadn't sat around thinking about how will I do it. That's not how it worked out. That's not how it happened.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And I'm so pleased to hear you say it. So this is my understanding of how this happens, because this has also happened to me. And I've put it together after a lot of reflection. I think when you just understand the human in you, you can do a lot of therapeutic work and journaling and all of those aspects that make you understand your body and your mind. And that's an important part. But there is an aspect of you that is the divine in you. And that the tool to get to an understanding of that is meditation. But when you do get to understand the divine in you, you actually figure out, well, I think that's the 99% and the 1% is like sitting right here. And then when the two meet on a continuous basis, every time you get into meditation, both of them meet, I really feel like you become a tool for the divine. Uh-huh. And so then now it's using you, or the field is using you for greater benefit of not just you, but everybody. And so when you were saying, I just said it, I think that's the moment, like you were the tool and the perfect person to be like, okay, then you go and do this. And there was no pre-planned, premeditated answer or anything. And so it makes it so true and sincere in a very pure way. So that was beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, you put it really well. I think if I hadn't been a meditator, so in our tradition, what we would say is that the field of intelligence wants incarcerated people to learn to meditate because it is beneficial to them. Oh, so all thoughts, all forms, and all phenomenon come from the field of intelligence and manifest through humans and through everything, all forms and all phenomenon. I wouldn't have been the only person that was getting that experience and getting that desire. I was the one that acted on it, and others have too, of course, which is a kind of a really wonderful thing, because if I hadn't been meditating, what would have happened? Let's just say I was a meditation teacher who didn't meditate. Not going to happen, but let's just say it would have been something like, oh, I have this desire to teach incarcerated people. I'll do that in 5 years once my business is working better and I've got an income and I can fund that. So I'll wait and I'll do it later. And if I had done that, then it wouldn't probably have happened. And it had to happen in that moment. And as a result, I would say I was supported through that process. So all things became available to me. One, I get an opportunity to work in Rikers Island, one of the most notorious prisons in America, perhaps the world. And it turns out that the people in there wanted to learn to meditate. They wanted to learn to meditate, that the administration made it possible for me to teach. All of these things started happening, which aren't necessarily going to happen. When you force things, that's when you get blocked. But when things start opening up before you, you know you're onto a good thing.
Yeah. So that's so interesting that you said that the people in there were also interested in meditation. Could you speak a little bit about your initial, like when you started, how was that path, and what is the difference between, well, I guess not the difference, but I wonder what is it like to hold space in an environment that's rooted in like trauma, survival, and control? Like a prison is definitely that, right? Like, how do you hold space?
Well, I mean, basically, I don't really try to do anything. Maybe the way that I could answer that is just to start off by telling you about my first day and my experience there when I first walked in there. So I'm a journalist, and I have gone into prisons before, but very little. In Melbourne, when I used to live there, I covered a couple of stories in the prison system. It was a women's prison. It was very different to Rikers Island, which is a slightly intimidating environment the first time you go in there. First of all, it smells. It's all because it's so closed and there's no airflow. It smells of stale body smell. It's not because it's dirty, I hasten to add. I don't think it is dirty, but it is, it smells. So there's that to start off with. People stare at you. You're a woman, so people will stare at you because it's a men's prison. And I guess because people from very different backgrounds to me, I wasn't sure if they would be interested in hearing from me. I've got an Australian accent. I'm just like nothing like the people who are in there. But the truth is I am like them because we're all human. And so the first day I arrived, they took me into a room and there were 40 incarcerated men in this room. And they asked me to tell them about meditation. So I did. And everybody listened really closely, extremely respectful, asked really good questions. And I had in the back of my mind, I kind of had a checklist of things that needed to happen if I was going to continue, if I was going to do this work. The first thing was people had to want it. I didn't want to have to sell it, or convince people that it was a good idea. So first of all, they had to want it. Second thing was they had to actually participate in the classes themselves. They had to actually participate, so that meant meditate in the class, and after the class, meditate on their own in their cells. So if they were prepared to do those, if they wanted it, if they would come to all 4 classes, if they were then meditating in the classes in their cells on their own, and then the fourth thing was I asked them to become my advocate in the prison. Usually somebody would pay a course fee to learn to meditate. And there is an important thing about when you pay for something of value. So when you receive something of value, you need to give something of value. So I would say to them, you need to be my advocate. You can't pay me and I don't expect you to, of course, but you need to become my advocate in here. And they did all of these things. And as soon as I saw that, I was excited to start off with, but as soon as they really saw that they really wanted to participate, I was completely sold on it. Yeah. So that's how it started.
Wow. And how has this particular work with this particular group of people, has it really evolved your own understanding of shame or regret or forgiveness or even freedom? Because I'm just curious, like, has that evolved?
It was certainly of myself, actually, because I've taught people, so I teach not just in Rikers Island, I also teach in North Dakota, and I've taught, in your introduction, you said that, I've taught around 100 people, but I've actually taught now around 350 incarcerated people. So I've taught a lot. And a lot of them have been in North Dakota, in the North Dakota State Penitentiary, and in a place called the James River Correctional Center, and in a women's prison there. And so I've taught a lot of people. And I've taught people who have done some of the worst things that you can imagine, all the crimes, really. And not that I go and check out everybody's crime before I teach them, but invariably you find out about certain people. And my attitude is, which is really being fostered by the philosophy, the Vedic meditation philosophy, is that when people, all of us, not just incarcerated people, all humans act from their state of consciousness, which means given your set of circumstances, this is the only way that you can behave. And the way to think about that, or the way that I think about it, is think back to when you were in a less evolved state. Could be last week, but think back to when you were about 8 years old. If you didn't get your way, you'd throw your doll or throw your toy, or you would. And I can think back to when I was in my 20s, the way that I would have behaved in a relationship compared to now that I'm in my 50s, and how I would relate to extremely different. But I couldn't have done any differently back then in my 20s or 30s, because all of the skills, all my knowledge, and the state of my consciousness at that time, that was the best I could do. So I understand that for all people. And so I don't find I have to go in and forgive anyone or anything. I'm just like, okay, you're here and you want to learn meditation. I'm so into that, and let's go, let's do that. But where my thinking has really evolved, it's in relation to myself, because even though I believe, or I accept that all humans act from their state of consciousness with what they can, that they do with what they can at the time, to the best of their ability, I haven't always given myself that sort of, I haven't been as an accepting or forgiving of myself. And and it's really helped me do that. I'm much kinder to myself now, because part of me goes, well, if you're accepting that that person who killed a number of people did the best with what he could at that time, then why can't you let yourself, forgive yourself for being, rude to your partner the other week or something, or all the stuff that humans do. Short on the phone to a call center person, because you're irritable and you're in a hurry, kind of thing. Those things that you think, God, I shouldn't have spoken to that person like that. Well, yeah, you shouldn't have. It'd be really good if you hadn't, but you did. And there's no point in the way that I think more now is I was doing my best. I'm not a bad person, but sometimes I wish I had been a little bit different. But I'm just so much kinder to myself around these things now. It feels good, actually.
Yeah, it's incredible that you can be, I think you have to believe in consciousness and to believe that you are more than just the body to be able to understand the profound thing that you just said. And so anybody who's listening, a lot of our audience is into meditation, so I know there will be no problems. But somebody who's listening for the first time or is just curious about meditation, I would love for you to simplify what you explained before about everything is in alignment with your state of consciousness. Like your thoughts, words, actions are coming from that. Could you simplify that for our audience a little bit?
One way of looking at it is to think about, just to try to put yourself in another person's shoes. And from what I understand, well, for a start, we know that something like 90% of incarcerated people have come from traumatic backgrounds. So their childhoods have been extremely disrupted, either by poverty Poverty is the first thing. Racism is also an addiction. All of these things contribute to put people to mean that people have a particular state of mind. So they're more stressed. They're carrying more stress. So under certain circumstances, they behave in a particular way. Now, you could say that's their choice. Everybody does have some free will, of course, but they're also acting from habit, from deep sadness, from deep grief, from anger that's buried inside them, a whole lot of circumstances that they're unable to control. So what we hear in these classes, in these meditation classes, we've done extensive evaluation of people in our classes. I've got an evaluation director for the Light Inside, which is my organization. And he has looked, so we ask a series of questions at the start of their meditation course. And then we ask the same questions at the end of the meditation course. And then we ask them over the few weeks following the course. And the questions are about their well-being. And what we've discovered is that just in 4 days, their anger diminishes enormously. So we measure it at the start, we measure it at the end. They're feeling so much happier, and they will say things like, I feel so much less angry. I don't want to be angry with my cellmate. I don't want to punch my cellmate. I didn't yell at my wife, because we've done it mainly with the male incarcerated people that I work with. So I guess what I'm saying here is that people have traumatic backgrounds. We know that. The science tells us that. We also know that when you are traumatized, ask yourself, am I at my best when I'm carrying a lot of stress, when I'm not sleeping properly and I'm angry? How do I behave? So I apply that same sort of thinking to incarcerated people.
Yeah, and I think everything that you said also applies to all of us, because incarcerated or not, a lot of us are also living in self-imposed prisons in our own minds, and the underground feelings behind those and the emotions are all the same, of fear, survival, and just not being able to understand what is the next best thing to do. And that is a state of consciousness. And so I loved what you said about becoming kinder to yourself, therefore, because you can distance yourself from the punitive aspect of figuring out what you did and not living in that state, not living in regret, but actually seeing, well, I did this because that is the best that I could do at that time, but I can be better now in the next moment.
Absolutely. It's never, certainly with myself, there's something about gentleness which is incredibly healing, and it's kind. Like, I try to treat myself like I would a small child, just like with a little bit of understanding, much more understanding than I would have ever done before. And that is as a result of looking at these incarcerated people who come to the class. It's all voluntary for a start. And there's something incredibly uplifting about seeing people that really want to change, that they really are prepared to do something that a lot of people don't want to do, and that is sit in silence for 20 minutes and see what happens. That, to me, it's extremely motivating, actually, just to experience that with other people.
Yeah. Well, on that note, is there something that comes to mind that somebody said inside that stayed with you?
Many things, yes. Well, there was one guy in Rikers Island, his name was Angel, and on the first day, so if you think that, so basically I've met these people the day before in an intro talk, and usually the intro talk is I walk into what's called their housing unit, and when I walk in there, there's cells on either side and on 2 levels. And I walk in there, and these guys are not expecting to see me. And the intro talk is to explain what meditation is and to tell them how to come to the class the next day. And so when I walk in there, they're just like, who is this person? Who's just walked into our house, essentially. There's guys with their tops off, and, it's like it's their home. And So I walked in and people gather around me, and there was this guy there who I now know is called Angel, and he was a hostile-looking guy, I thought. I experienced him as hostile because he was taller than me and he was kind of scowling and he was looking down at me. And I now realize really he wasn't hostile, and I wasn't scared of him anyway. It was curiosity. And he was very curious. And he came to the class the next day. And after the first class, he stayed back and he said, "What does this mean? What does that mean?" Because people in a prison environment, they don't want to show that they're curious. They don't want to show they care. They don't want to show any emotion at all, or because it's vulnerability, right? So he was like, "Tell me everything about what you just said when you were teaching us." So I gave him a few. Anyway, then the next day he came back, and this is when it started to get really interesting. He said at the end of the class, after everybody had left, he said, "I'm feeling much softer. Like I feel vulnerable." I can't remember if he said the word vulnerable, but he indicated he felt vulnerable. And I said, "Well, it's great, Angel, isn't it?" He's like, "No, that is not great at all. I'm in a prison. You don't want to feel like that in a prison. I've got to protect myself at times that I have to fight." And so I explained to him, well, just because you can feel that softness inside you doesn't mean that you won't have the capacity to respond and defend yourself. In fact, I would say that your opportunities your capacity to defend yourself will be enhanced through meditation, because all of your senses are much more attuned. The more you meditate, the more sharper you become. Your things like when you go into fight or flight, when you're attacked, I was explaining this to him, when you're attacked and you have to defend yourself, you go into fight or flight. And you lose your capacity to be aware of what's going on around you. And as a result, you get this tunnel vision. Not a good situation to be in if you want to fight someone. You want to have the capacity to know what's going, especially if there are other people who are like crowding around and are ready to jump on you as well. So I was explaining to him that in fact that the softness is not bad and that these other things are enhanced. And in fact, he'll be in a better situation. Then he kind of looked skeptical, but anyway. Next day, he came in, and at the end of the class, he said, "Mate, you've got to just we're not telling you this story. It's important to understand that this is maximum security, Rikers Island, with a man who's charged with murder, he has lived in the Bronx. He described to me, lived in the Bronx. His mother had been sex trafficked. His father wasn't around. He got his first gun when I think he was 8. I guess it's a tough situation to be in. And here's this man talking about how soft he was feeling. And then the next day, he said at the end of the class, he came up to me and he said, "I felt like I was flying." And I said, "Oh, could you explain what that means to fly?" And he said, because I had this vision of him sort of having a sense of himself being on the ceiling, looking down. And he said, "No, I felt like I was just completely out of my body. I felt like I was free," which I just found incredibly moving that he felt, well, this is one of the promises of meditation, that we're not confined by the body. Actually, we're everything. And he was experiencing that on the 3rd day of meditation. He was experiencing that. So I've got a ton of stories, but that's one of my favorites, Angel. It's a wonderful conversation to have.
Yeah, I love it. Do you think that just because they are in such dark space and it is constant fight or flight, that it is constant triggering, that it may also be that the path to the divine is easier in some way?
Look, I think it's a really good question, and I wonder about that. I must say that some of the most, I guess you would say, dramatic and profound early experiences of meditation have occurred with me because I've taught a lot of people outside of prison as well. Some of the most profound conversations I had inside prison, and I would speculate as around some of the things that you just said. I do think that when you're in a very dark place, that perhaps there's a level of openness to change, to experiencing something Yeah, I do. I teach the corrections officers as well. And, corrections officers are they're under a lot of pressure. I have a huge respect for the corrections officers. Corrections officers have a terrible public image, maybe deserved in some cases, I'm sure. But, in my experience, they're average people trying to do a job,
And a very stressful job.
Of course, absolutely. I actually did some training. I did corrections officer training a few weeks ago. I was learning to be a corrections officer so I would understand their job better and I'd be better at my job. So I learned things like pressure point control tactics. I learned how to do a cell search, how to do a body search, all of these things. And I was training with these very young people who were about to do this very difficult job. And I realized not only do they have to defend themselves, they have to know under extremely pressured circumstances how to use their pressure point to bring somebody, a big person, to their knees. That's hard. At the same time, they're really meant to behave. Well, certainly in North Dakota, I'm not saying this is in all the prisons, because some prisons have a very different approach to how you manage and control people. In North Dakota, their attitude is, we're dealing with human beings. Let's see if we can reach an understanding. They use violence, absolutely last resort. Control and violence, last resort. They try to have a conversation. And so people have to kind of be a social worker as well. They need, in North Dakota, the way that people are trained is that the idea is that they would have, if they have a conversation where they have to discipline someone, then they need to be able to show a history of them trying to also give that person good feedback. So do you understand? What I'm trying to say is they're not allowed to just go around punishing people. They have to show that they're developing relationships with people and helping them in their life. So I developed an understanding of the corrections officers, I guess an empathy that I, just otherwise wouldn't have had. But my point was going to be the corrections officers, because they work extremely long hours, they're extremely tough job, they're less open to having a broad spiritual experience. I'm not, and I can completely understand that. But incarcerated people have got this, they're living in this darkness. So the contrast when they experience meditation is huge. And I think that they're prepared to go with that. They don't really know what they're going to experience until they experience it. And when they feel it, they go for it. So it's pretty great.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing some of those deeper insights into the differences. And I feel like maybe for the corrections officers and the staff, maybe for them to really lean into the spiritual process, maybe some institutionalized change and some greater changes have to happen to the prison system so that their job itself is redefined in a little bit of a more constructive way. And then it's easier to let go, because I totally get what you were saying about that. Amazing. I know I have you for just a few more minutes, and I'm really curious if you would look back on this colorful path of yours. What do you think, what part of yourself has this path introduced you to that maybe you would not have met if you had not listened to this calling?
Oh, I love that question. The part that has grown in me, and I suppose I've tapped into, is my heart. So in my previous life, it's not that you don't use your heart, but I was just never aware of it in my professional life. I was just like very, very, I guess you would say, just sort of very, I don't know. I mean, I think I was maybe more clinical. But what this has allowed me to do is to be led by my heart at all time, which doesn't mean that you don't use, your active intelligence. Of course you do. But to be allowing the sense that the heartfelt feelings grow and act on them is a whole different other way to be in the world. Yeah. And that's been the gift, that I can actually have a job where that is my primary directive. That's great.
And to walk in alignment with your purpose and your skills and your interests and your passion and your training. I think That is a colorful path. That's what I would call it.
Thank you. It is colorful, for sure, has been.
Well, as a parting question, if somebody listening is afraid to be still or they find stillness difficult, what would you say to them today?
I would say I understand because I've been there. I've experienced that myself. I would say probably, if I were you, one of the easiest ways to experience silence and stillness is through Vedic meditation. We're actually, and so to find a teacher of Vedic meditation and sit down with them and learn about what they teach and see if it resonates at all. Because sitting with stillness and silence is really important, and it's so rewarding once you can do that. And to have someone to hold your hand through that is a really great idea, I think.
Yeah, and that's the support, I think, that can really tip you over the edge of inaction. So if anyone listening wants to know more about you, wants to learn how to do Vedic meditation with you, and I know you're in New York, do you teach in other places? Like, tell us a little bit about how to get to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I teach in New York City. You can contact me at Joh, Joh, at johjarvis.com. And also at The Light Inside. So The Light Inside is the dash or hyphen, depending on whether you're in southern or northern hemisphere, the hyphen or dash lightinside.org. And, there are also a ton of other Vedic meditation teachers. I mean, I teach in Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide, as well as New York, but there are a ton of others all over the world. And maybe in the show notes, you could put a link to our teacher and people can search for a teacher in that area.
Yes, absolutely. We will also link to your website, The Light Inside, to you, and of course, the great, beautiful group of Vedic meditation teachers that we both know that are available to teach you how to meditate 20 minutes a day to change your life. Well, 40 minutes a day because it's 20 in the morning, 20 in the evening, and that's where you start. Well, thank you so much, Joh. I know we're on time. I don't really want to let you go, but I have to let you go. And thank you for sharing some of these really profound experiences and for charting a path that many would feel not possible or maybe even be afraid of, but you're doing it and it is incredible.
Thanks, Charu. I really appreciate it. I loved your questions and thank you for the opportunity to talk to your audience.
Thank you. And next time you come, we will pick up where we leave and maybe get into more insights on your continued incredible journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
If this episode moved something in you, please hit the follow button. Please leave a review, a star rating for us. It really matters to me to know how you feel about things. And I hope you continue to walk this colorful path with me. You can reach me anytime through Divine Amuleto, my Instagram account. That's where I share the tools, practices, and fine jewelry that supports this journey of transformation. So do check it out. Thank you for being here. Until next time, may you keep listening to the wisdom within.